So today I'm joined by Ed Kelly. Ed Kelly is a healthcare executive with more than 25 years of experience. The last 10 years, he's focused on helping providers turn around. Ed, can we start off the conversation by you giving us just a picture of how you start this work? What situation do healthcare providers usually approach you in? What sort of information they provide, and how do you decide what first steps to take?
Yeah, yeah, good question. I first of all, I get approached by either like recruiters or board members, leaders of the organization, and usually, type of word of mouth type of arrangement. And one of my first questions when I ask them about term, I ask, tell me about the history of the organization, what the issues are, and a question I ask them and I repeat it throughout my process is, what do you want? What do you want to have occur, and what are the issues? And then I evaluate that after a series of other questions, and to make sure I'm the right person for the job, because there's opportunities that are just not a good fit, because I want to make sure I'm providing good long-term value while I'm there and well after I leave. So I ask them a lot of probing questions at first, and then if we decide that it is a good fit, then we move into the next phase, which is what I call developing the vision.
So, how do you go about developing that vision for the particular institution?
Yeah, well, first of all, I start typically with the board of that organization, and I quickly what's critical to it at the board level, really for any organization, not just healthcare, is making sure is to ascertain and kind of diagnose: do they have alignment? Are they coordinated? A lot of times they're not. A lot of time you have some people who are really think that this is the way a company needs to go, and you have maybe a minority or majority saying no, and that so you the first part is getting that alignment and in coordination within the board members, and that's oftentimes often the first several months of the conversations, because it won't flow unless you do have, and you're not going to have 100% alignment, but like 80 plus more, something in that range or better is where you need to be. Anything less than that, it's just not going to take off. It'll be like kind of a failure to launch kind of a initiative. They want to change, but they're not ready for change. And so I have to make sure, are they ready for change? Because oftentimes, as we all know, change is hard. But they
Yeah.
also know for a lot of groups, it's a matter of survival. They don't want to be acquired by a private equity firm or by Optum. They want to remain independent, but they know it's becoming increasingly difficult. So then once we do have that alignment and about the vision, we make it really clear, what is our statement? And I say, but be really clear about, you want to pick about 3 or 4 big goals that are achievable, but are bold, that are stretch goals, but you can achieve them to get to want to be. For one organization, they had 3 pillars. We want to be the provider of choice in the market, the employer of choice in our market, and remain independent. Okay, easier said than done. And then we built out a 3-year strategic plan around those 3 pillars. And so they chose 3. But I would say, and that was after talking about, we want to make sure you keep a real laser focus on those pillars of your organization. And I always say, don't go beyond 4, because you won't be able to really move the needle on 4, depending on the size of the organization, of course. But I stick with 3 or 4, and from there we develop a goal statement. We talk about vision, mission, values. We also talk about developing a theme, a phrase around this change. Like, for instance, when Best Buy went with the Aubert Jolie, when they went through their change, it was called the New Blue, and everybody knew what that meant. And
Hmm.
that actually has power all the way up from the board down to the front lines, that they're part of something really important. And then from there, you develop the strategic plan. I typically, again, using those 3 pillars or 4 pillars over a 3, maybe a 5 year, but I say, from my experience, 4 to 5 gets a little gray, but within 3, you can really hold yourself accountable, having really clear goals and objectives. And the other part too is know your starting point. A lot of times you think, oh, we dominate the market, or maybe this or that. And it may be completely untrue or true, but first start, honestly know where you are today. What's your baseline? And also objectively and subjectively, do you really have good quality in the market? Or there's certain services that actually you never knew that are not doing so well from a reputation standpoint, because brand and reputation, huge as well. Hard to earn, easily lost. And then once you have that clear vision and you have the strategic plan around it, it's important to make sure you communicate it, not just among the shareholders or the owners or the leadership, but all the way down to the front lines, because everyone needs to know, everyone needs to have a voice, because high performing companies are high trust environments. Part of building that trust is informing people of where the organization's going. A lot of times, I'll give you an example. When we had a strategic plan in a large, about 120 doctor orthopedic, or excuse me, multi-specialty group practice, we had the plan all done. We worked on it, took over a year. And then when it was completed, I asked the board, I would really like to develop a Cliff Note version of this, redact out all the confidential information, but to give a Cliff Note version of where we're going, the strategic plan, to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And they ultimately agreed on that. And I was so, I mean, I was very surprised at the reaction from the front lines. You go, I never knew where we were going. I just come to work. I like my boss. I like the doctors I work with, but I just didn't know it. And I learned also and we also asked management to make sure that they knew where all their staff, how they fit into that bigger plan. So what this is kind of winning the hearts and minds, part of a turnaround. And here's the top thing. I have a few phrases that I'll say throughout today's talk. One of it, I like to say, it's all about the people. And you have to support the people genuinely, authentically, whether it's educating them, giving them the tools, but just checking in with them. How are you doing? And that's what I call frontline leadership, where the management, not just the leaders, not just the board, but also the middle management on down. And so there's a lot of ways of doing that. And I could talk about examples of that. How do you support the people? But if you don't have that, I don't care what you're doing, whether it's med device, making cars, whatever industry you're in, you got to have, the people feeling I'm part of something, and they appreciate me. Like in an old story I like to say, like during putting the man on the moon back in the 60s with JFK, he came up to a custodian and Cape Canaveral. He said, well, what do you do here? And he says, I'm helping put a man on the moon. I mean, that's just that esprit de corps, that type of DNA. You show me a company with that, I'll show you a very high performing company that is the leader in the market, no matter what their industry is.
So do you, that's a very thorough answer. Thank you. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where the board, the leadership of the hospital perhaps they don't have a clear picture of where they really are and what the problems really are? They bring you in to solve problem X, but you look at the organization, you say, well, actually, maybe Y is a bigger issue. Have you come across that situation?
Absolutely. And that the other thing, part of the turnarounds is I tap different talent out there, whether depending what the needs are. What you're talking about, let's say we're doing an assessment, a market assessment, whether let's say it's brand, maybe it's could be some objective numbers. Are we growing as fast as we think we are? But we bring in outside data to really validate those assumptions. And there's really good expert, and that's why I would recommend to any leader is to reach out and tap the talent that's out there. The technology now is amazing. The ability to communicate like this is so easy and transparent. That's what we would do. And so we validate. We it's kind of like trust but verify, that type of approach. And that's, I think, the leader's job is to take those comments, those assumptions, what we think we are, and validate them, and then also bring in some new ideas. And by the way, we also found some things we didn't even know about that were actually considered like this in this market, but over here in a different state, they barely know us, and yet we do a lot of business there. So you also, in part of that process, you discover some good opportunities and challenges.
Yeah. So what are the most, I mean, obviously you adapt your method to each institution you go into, but what are the most common problems that you'll address first? Is it communication? Is it like what is the most common thing you have to address first?
Yeah, and that's the second part, what I call achieving the vision. That's the hard part. Everybody says, what's the hardest part of a turnaround though? Well, first of all, take care of the people, and that takes time. It takes time, a long time to build the trust, and just a few seconds to lose it. But to your point is, the challenge that we have is making sure, do we have the right data? Do we honestly know where we stand in the market relative to our competition? Do we really understand our capabilities going forward when we think we can do something, when in fact we may not have the resources or talent to effectuate that strategy that sounds really nice? We have to really make sure we validate it. And that's all part of the execution planning. And that's the second part of what I call achieving the vision. And making sure you got to make sure, first of all, that your foundation is solid. Your basic core business, you're not hemorrhaging somewhere, because you got to build and motivate. You got to build a solid foundation, both operationally, financially, culturally. Because if it's a toxic environment, you're not going to be able to recruit the talent that you want. They're going to come and go, and the whole plan fails. So part of that is taking the strategic vision, and then start kicking it into action with the execution. And what I've used with one organization, a large health system of about 30, well, medium size, about 3,000, 4,000 employees, where we use the KPIs or key performance indicators.
Mm-hmm.
And that really bears out, boy, I tell you, it's a great tool to really bear out what you think you can do. And when you think and talks about your limitations very quickly, or what you're actually good at, it conversely also, it allows you to really identify huge opportunities. When you think it was just a little flicker, turns into a huge opportunity that no one else is addressing, and suddenly off and running. But I'll give you an example of the KPIs. So this organization, I was brought in to implement their 3-year strategy. They already had a very nice strategic plan, very well laid out, very clear top line strategies, and tactics. And so we're using the KPIs to do it. So we developed a dashboard for the board. And this took about probably a couple months, a couple presentations at the board to get it down and curate and distilled down. I think it was 14 KPIs at the board level that moved the lever on each one of their areas of their strategic plan. And then from there, once that was approved, then we moved it down into the department levels or division levels, and then department levels, where maybe a department manager might, and we said no more than 5, just 5 KPIs in your, but each, whether that's saying, well, I want to improve or reduce the cost of buying linen by 10%. Okay, well, how does that move? How does that cascade up all the way to the board level? So we had alignment from the frontline departments all the way up to the board, and it wasn't top down, it was also lateral and horizontal between departments. Oftentimes we would discover a best practice, and we'd implement that in other like departments where that would apply. So the KPIs was a great tool in achieving the vision.
Yeah, yeah. I was surprised when you said 14. 14, I'm a big believer in KPIs, but 14 is a lot to keep track of.
And I know we debated it about, I said, can we get under 10, please? Just because it's hard. I said, it's hard to have that acute focus, but it was a very large board of a lot of different diverse interests, shall we say. And so we settled on, we started out with over 20 and got down to 14. And that is, but I agree with you. 14 is I would not recommend having that many.
Yeah. So can we get really nitty gritty with an example here? You've got an organization, you've developed a vision. Can you talk about the best practice in communication? How do you communicate to the large group of people? What tools do you use? How often do you communicate? What types of communication at different times? Can you get down to the nitty gritty there?
Yeah, I sure can. I'll talk from my experience running hospitals and large medical groups, what's worked and what hasn't worked. And it's no particular order, but you have to do them in different ways. Some people are visual, some are here through learning, as we all know. So what I've done, and also what I feel about communication as a root language, is that leadership needs to be accessible and visible. That's part of communication. So what I've done, I've had newsletter, and I do newsletters on a steady basis. You got to make sure you commit to it. If you're going to do a newsletter, they're a lot of work. You got to say, if we're going to do it, we have to be committed, because that consistency is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also believe it or not, I give my cell phone out to everyone. If you ever got one of my emails, I have my cell phone on it as well. People think, man, you're nuts. You're going to get calls around all hours of the night, and I don't. People respect it, and they appreciate it, because it's very symbolic of saying they have access to the CEO or their leader. I don't push it on others. That's my style. So that's another area of communication. Another one is town halls. I do town halls. I really believe in town halls. I also believe in consistent management meetings, and I invite the managers to bring their staff in as appropriate. Now, if it's confidential information, no, you can't have that. But I want to keep that transparency going. Another way of communicating as well is making sure that you're very transparent with the data. You talked about the strategy. That's great. We've got these pillars. How are we doing relative to those pillars? Are we making any progress? And what you do, and a part of the communication, you highlight an achievement, like so did this, and you want to have the spotlight be on the people doing the work. So that is really part of the communication. It's not just top-down communication. It's hearing from their colleagues as well. And that was, for me, that gets a lot of traction too. You know, this way I learned. People really love and helping each other out, cheering each other on. And I also make sure in healthcare, what I call a dyad model, as part of communication, I also sit in on meetings when whether I'm invited, whether I'd like to be there, I'd like to be visible, but I also bring physician leadership in there as well, and to make sure that they're hearing it too. And they walk in, they go, "Wow, Dr. Smith is here. I've only heard about it. I've never met him. He's our top doctor. What? Wow!" And just that there shows support and respect.
So
But
what sort of cadence? If I'm a frontline worker, I'm at a company that you're involved, you're running the turnaround in. What cadence of communication can I expect?
I do for the local, depending on the size of the organization. Like one organization, we had 11 sites, and I was at each organization once a month. So once a month, and then we would have a larger kind of a larger all staff meeting every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would also attend ad hoc different meetings where I went to their turf, because part of the communication, I wanted to let them know I'm here for you, not the other way around. And so I went on to ad hoc meetings as well. Then we had a monthly newsletter, and then we also had, ask the CEO or ask our top doctor questions, and that could come from anybody, and we'd always respond. May not have an answer, but we'd always respond. So there was a way for they could communicate to us about specific issues. And also, because as you know, when there's lack of communication and information, rumors fly. And so it's a job of to be proactive in your communication. But of course, you're going to get some questions saying, "Hey, I had a friend of mine, he got promoted. I didn't. I'm really feeling, I don't know why." All you get anything under the sun, but you need to address it. And just by responding to them shows respect, and to keep the air, as I say, clear.
Yeah, thank you. So Ed, when you join an organization, how do you go about evaluating the leadership team that's in place and any changes that might be necessary?
Well, what I do, I sit down and have one-on-ones with them, each of them, and I have a candid discussion. I make sure that I don't play favorites. I'm here to help. I'm here to support. I will ask, and I don't expect people to be fully candid at the first conversation, but it's a series of talks where you have to build that trust.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a series of one-on-ones, and then having group meetings as well. But I'll tell them, when we come into the group meeting, I will expect you to contribute. And maybe you haven't in the past, I do expect you to contribute. And because I want you to know it's a safe environment. And that's really a key as a culture, high performing company. Some of the aspects, there's several aspects to high performing companies in my opinion. One of it is a safe environment, or what some people call a just culture environment, mm-hmm. where if something's wrong, you say it. You don't worry about being retaliated against, things like that. I really believe in that. But how I learn about coming into a company, though, it's those conversations. But consistent, again, don't be ad hoc about it. Have set meeting. Make sure you're happy, and that's how you build that cadence. You build that trust, because they say, "Wow, this is important. He's putting me on his calendar." And I like to go to their office too. I don't like them coming to mine to show support versus some sort of power play. I'm just not like that. But it works, and they open up. They're in their environments. And then moving on from there, again, about achieving the vision, what's critical, and this is well documented in many books, is hiring the best and holding out for the best. Don't fill the position because you're under pressure. And I mean, it's hard. But don't. And I know right now it's hard to find the talent in general, but and that can lead to a situation of, geez, I've only got 3 candidates. None of them are that great, but I got to fill it. I'd recommend not doing it. But explain to the people who are working, saying, "Look, I'm really working on this, but I hope you agree with me that we got to hire the best, but that means more work for you in the meantime." So being very open and honest with them, and being that, again, the transparency. But when you do get the best, the A players, they also tend to hang around A players, and they can be some of your best recruiters, your best ambassadors for it. That is a critical part of a turnaround as well. When they realize, okay, I'm putting my stock into this, I think they're going to take off. And then they see the KPIs happening. They see that, the consistency of the messaging, the transparency of the data, that it's really an employee, patient-centric, employee-centric environment with a real strong, clear mission. And then they say, and then you talk to people, and they can just see it on their face. You're smiling. You're like, yeah, it's innovative. Yeah, I'm being listened to for the first time. And that's key too, is again, respect. The leaders have to listen. You'll learn a lot more by listening, as we all know. As I said before, though, don't tolerate the B players too. In a new organization, sometimes you give them a chance to turn. Sometimes they're in the wrong job. Sometimes they just aren't with the mission, and they can be entrenched and recalcitrant. And if that's the case, then we need to move on. That's important too, as part of our turnaround, is identifying them. Don't wait too long, because when oftentimes you do move them on, you get the comments are thank you, thank you, thank you, and that last thing I'll say here is accountability and ownership, making sure that yes, it's a fun place to work on, but we got a job to do, making sure they understand, like with KPIs now, that there's accountability, but own it, but speak up. If you're having trouble, if you're falling down, you don't understand or don't have the tools, let us know. It's on you. That's accountability. And that ownership is, so it's really everybody's job.
Great, thank you. So Ed, presumably, you've come into organizations that have already tried to change and haven't been successful in it. So you've probably had a lot of great experience seeing what makes change unsuccessful. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are the key mistakes to avoid when you're driving change in an organization?
Well, I'll give you an example where I came into an organization. They had 3 CEOs in less than 6 years. And obviously there's something not quite right. And of course, before I signed on, I had several meetings with individual meetings, small meetings with board members to make sure that, again, are they even open to change? And number 2, am I the right fit for what they need? And it turns out that the CEOs, they were all good. They were not B-level people. They were good. Unfortunately, at the board level, there wasn't a majority, but there was a strong minority of, they say, thank you very much, but we're still going to go this way. So essentially the CEO was a puppet and warming his seat. And it was not, and either they were let go or they resigned. And so what I did, I brought in an expert who deals with board issues, management of boards, and also functioning of boards. And she was a big help, bringing in a third party objective. We got alignment. We also had 3 people on the board, 3 shareholders step off the board, because again, when I would talk about being recalcitrant, this is the way we've always been. They were, and they openly said that. They said, I don't agree. I'm not changing. Fortunately, they were the minority, and the group went a separate way, and the 3 stepped off the board, which was a good thing. And then things started to change. Then we had that alignment. So that was challenging, though. That took almost 11 months.
Yeah, that goes back to the very first point you made about alignment being the very first thing, the most important thing that you need.
Right.
So what's the number one thing you would encourage somebody who's brought in to bring about change to remember?
I would say, bottom line, take care of your greatest asset, take care of your people, hire the best. Then from there, leadership has a responsibility to make sure they clearly communicate the board's mission and vision, strategy, clearly communicate it, not just to your leaders, but to everyone in the company, and make sure that they know how they fit into the bigger picture. When you have that transparency, you will see people step up that you've never seen step up before, because now they know how they fit into the bigger picture. Yes, there's accountability and ownership, but if you hire the right people and hold it and have that, good support, they will do that without you asking. That's what A players do.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, A players attract A players. I have some friends who work at Google, and that's how they are the top place in Silicon Valley. It's a lot of great companies out there, but bottom line, it's the people. They want to work around high performers, and that is the hallmark of a high performing company, is the people.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. This was some really great information you shared today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.